Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on talking in Unit 3, Cultural Patterns and Processes, and today we're going to talk about some of the specific parts of culture and how we define the ways that we combine some of those specific cultural traits and how exactly do we categorize the groupings of those different cultural traits. So like I said, today we're going to be talking specifically about what happens when we combine those specific elements of culture, and how is it that we classify these different things? Because again, if you think about culture can be relatively complicated because we know that it can be broken down into many parts, and we know that there's a lot of times there's this overarching idea of culture, but if we get into specific places, not everyone's going to fit those particular molds, and that's kind of what we're going to be referring to today. So anyway, when we talk about culture and we begin to identify some of the specific parts of a person's culture, we have what's called a cultural trait. These are going to be the basic foundation of culture. So cultural traits are simply a single attribute of a person's culture. Now this could be anything from language to religion to the foodstuffs that people eat, the type of housing, type of clothing, the way that they interact with the environment, maybe the types of animals they keep as pets. Again, each of these would be thought of as a single attribute of culture, and so that's what's described as a cultural trait. And the reason that it's kind of complicated, and you think about it in terms of this idea of scale of inquiry, like we've been talking about, when we look at these different levels of parts of culture, again, it's going to depend on what exact level is it that we are trying to identify and trying to understand and explain. Think about the United States, and we think about what would be considered American culture. We know across the entire country there are maybe a couple of attributes that we think about. We think about maybe the language of English. We think about Christianity as the predominant religion. We think about this idea of rule of law, certain freedoms that Americans enjoy. We think about pop culture as a kind of an expression of American culture and things like that. But so we see that kind of the overarching idea of American culture. But we know that, and if you're familiar with some of the different parts of the United States, we know that if we kind of go into this more localized level, the regional level, we know the different regions of the United States have kind of their own unique systems and cultures. So we think about the Southeast, and what that looks like, and then how that's different from the North and the Northeast, or even the Mid-Atlantic states, different from the Midwest, different from the West. And so we know that there's these overarching ideas of what is American culture, but as we look at the specific regions, we know that it becomes a little bit different. And that's where sometimes this idea of culture can get kind of complicated, and that's how we look at these different parts of culture and how we describe it. So if we think of it like a pyramid, and we're working up the pyramid in terms of the building blocks of culture. So the cultural trait would be down here at the bottom. Any single cultural trait that I talk about, a lot of times can be practiced by a large number of people, whether it's English, language of English, or maybe it's a particular religion, or it is style of dress, or any of those types of things. A single cultural trait a lot of times can be practiced by a large number of people across a large geographic area. So that's these are all the pieces, the bits, and the foundations. But what happens is, as we start to make things a little bit more complicated and get a little bit more specific, we're going to start seeing that fewer and fewer people participate in those. And so when we take several of these cultural traits and we put them together to create a unique combination of cultural traits, we get what's called a cultural complex. So we moved our way up the pyramid. Our next step up would be the cultural complex. And I apologize, I'm not dividing up my pyramid very evenly, but I think you get kind of the idea. So the next step up would be this cultural complex, because again, it is a unique combination of several cultural traits. And so we know that because of the unique combination, or the nature of the unique combination, you're going to have fewer people participating in a specific set of cultural complexes. You're going to have a fewer number of people who are participating in those, and so it becomes more unique and it becomes more specialized to a particular group of people living in a particular place. And so when we move even further and we try to put these things even closer together, we end up developing what's called a cultural system. Now, a cultural system is when we take several cultural complexes and we put them together. And now what happens with the cultural system is we look at several cultural complexes and look at some of the cultural traits that they share, and we kind of ignore some of the specifics in terms of maybe some of the things that make them not similar. So again, if you think about the United States, if you know anything about the regions of the United States, you know the South is predominantly, the United States overall is predominantly Christian, but the South is predominantly Baptist, whereas some of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeastern states are predominantly Catholic, and so they practice Christianity, but they practice different forms of Christianity. They both speak English, but they speak different, we might say they speak different accents or dialects of English. Maybe they have different sets of values and things like that. But again, there's this overarching idea of American culture. And so when we talk about cultural systems, it's when we take cultural complexes, bring them together, and look at some of the cultural complexes that share several different cultural traits. And so we get a little bit larger geographic area, because again, what we're doing is we're ignoring some of the specifics and trying to bring in a larger, broader, more general idea of what cultural groups are similar to each other. And so that leads us into a conversation of what's called cultural regions and cultural realms. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at across the world, and we're looking at different parts of the world, and we're trying to identify some of these geographic regions or areas that have similar cultural attributes, or maybe they're related by their cultural their cultural systems. And so again, when we look at cultural regions, we're looking at geographic regions that are similar based upon the culture that they practice. And so we're looking across the world, looking at these regions that have similar cultures, and the reason that we're going to bring them together is because what it does is it creates a particular regional identity for those particular people, and also it creates a regional identity for the people that are outside of those places, and it helps us to understand how these things kind of come together a little bit better. And again, what's going to happen is for those people in that place, there's going to be some sort of attachment created between themselves and the space that they're in, but also between themselves and the others who are living in the area, because they can come to see each other as having a similar culture, similar identity, so it creates that attachment for them. And so when we talk about these cultural regions, it's actually the creation of a perceptual region, which is based on the attachment that the people have with the space, but it's also based on a perception that's going to be created both inside and outside that particular region. Because what we're talking about is we're talking about geographic regions, and we have to remember that geographic regions in and of themselves have really nothing to do with the broader overall cultural and context of the culture. And so it's possible to have cultures that link together across fairly large geographic areas. And so what's going to happen is this region is going to be created specifically based on the culture that is practiced in that particular place. Now, it's really important to remember that historically speaking, a lot of these cultural regions that if we look at them today, didn't exist maybe 300, 400, 500 years ago. And it's entirely possible that a lot of these cultural regions that we talk about could eventually change over time based upon the events that go on and that happen in the future. So we have these different cultural realms, and so again, the cultural realm, basically what it is, it's you bring together several of the cultural regions and you create a larger identity out of them, and you bring together what are called cultural realms. And again, so these cultural realms are larger geographic areas that bring together several cultural realms. Now, I've looked at several different sites and things, and I've seen the identification of somewhere between 10 or 12 different cultural realms in our world. And so when we look at those, here are the list of the different cultural realms that we have in our world. We have Anglo-America, Latin America, and we have the European cultural realm. We have what's called the Islamic cultural realm, the Sub-Saharan African cultural realm, the Slavic cultural realm, which will include Eastern Europe as well as Russia, the Sino-Japanese cultural realm, the Southeast Asian, the Indic, Austro-European, and then the Insular Oceanic. So these are recognized as the different cultural realms that we have around the world. Now again, if you think about it, Anglo-America, that's going to include the United States and Canada. Obviously, there are some clear differences between the United States and Canada in terms of their culture. However, cultural geographers have decided that there are enough similarities between the two that we could probably bring these two together and unite them together into a larger cultural realm to understand kind of the broader cultural context and the unity between them. And again, you could go through any of these and talk about how, if you look more specifically, the cultures are very different between different places. But again, cultural geographers have decided that, generally speaking, these areas are common enough to where we could unite them together in a single cultural realm. So that's all we're going to do today. We're just looking at the different parts of culture and how they can unite together to create a broader geographic understanding of the world. Next time we're going to be looking at cultural herds and talking about the diffusion of culture.